Good afternoon, dear colleagues, excellencies, Ambassador Cervone de Urso, Madam Nakamitsu, ambassadors, excellencies, dear colleagues. Thank you for joining us today in this birthday celebration. We turned 50 today. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to this commemorative event on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the Biological Weapons Convention. I am very pleased to see the great interest in this event, the full house that we have, as reflected in the many participants that are present here today, as well as those who are following us online. A warm welcome to the 2025 Disarmament Fellows who have joined us here in the room. So hello, dear colleagues, they're sitting at the back over there. It's lovely to have you here. And thank you all for marking the convention's 50th anniversary together with us. Today's event aims at hitting a pause, at least for the next 3 hours, and creating a rare space in our fast-paced world for joint reflection and for taking stock of the achievements made and the challenges we face and have encountered with the Biological Weapons Convention over the past 50 years, and to look at the status quo as well as what lies ahead for the convention. In the Secretary General's message on the 50th anniversary of the convention, he says, and I quote, over the past 5 decades, the convention has contributed towards collective efforts to reject the use of a disease as a weapon. However, we must remain vigilant. Recent advances in biology hold great promise, but also potential risks. The Biological Weapons Convention helps to ensure that such advances are only used for peaceful purposes, end of quote. In order to look at all of these 3 dimensions, the past, the present, and the future of this convention, UNODA and the Biological Weapons Convention Implementation Support Unit have convened 3 panels of distinguished speakers from the diplomatic community, academia, and civil society. We hope that you will find these diverse voices and perspectives insightful and inspiring. Please also make sure to pick up a copy of the commemorative publication available just outside the room, which features additional contributions from various authors. Last but not least, please also be invited to take a look at after this event at the historic photos and video footage from the negotiations and the adoption of the convention, which are displayed just outside this room. And so with that in mind, I'd like to hand over the floor to Ms. Nakamitsu, our Undersecretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Ms. Nakamitsu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Melanie, Your Excellency, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear colleagues and friends. The room is full. This is such a great feeling. Thank you very much for joining us here today for, I would say, a historical occasion to commemorate 50 years of the Biological Weapons Convention. It is my great honor to welcome you all, and we explore in this meeting, of course, the past successes, the present, and of course, most importantly, future of the convention with a series of expert-led panel discussions. So we are very much looking forward to this opportunity. Now, today's event is not just a celebration. Of course, we should celebrate, but it is an opportunity to reflect on its achievements and, crucially, to discuss ways to strengthen the convention for the future. I thank the European Union for its really generous support to the organization of our celebrations and other, of course, activities to mark the anniversary. As we meet in the Palais de Nation, just across from the council chambers where the convention was actually negotiated, we are reminded of its great significance as a hub for multilateralism. Geneva actually is a birthplace of many key disarmament instruments that have stood the test of time. Step by step, with each instrument, with each solution, each agreement, we build a cohesive and morally responsive framework that aims at protecting lives and livelihoods. The Biological Weapons Convention remains a testament of a conscience of humankind. For 50 years, the global norm has stood firm that the deliberate use of disease as a weapon against humans, animals, or plants remains an affront to humanity. This is the moral and legal safeguards that we cannot afford to let erode, especially in today's volatile geopolitical climate. Rising global tensions are putting multilateral disarmament under immense stress, or multilateralism in general under immense stress. International cooperation and norms that we have long relied upon are facing unprecedented challenges. In response, we must ensure the instruments of the 20th century can respond to today's 21st century global challenges. In this regard, we find hope and a renewed purpose, I would say, in recent adoption of the Pact for the Future. Through the Pact, member states, you yourselves, reaffirm that any use of chemical and biological weapons by anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances is unacceptable. One of the document's most critical elements is an emphasis on addressing emerging and evolving biological risks, if you remember. It reminds us to remain vigilant that the constant advances in science and technology benefit society rather than threaten our existence. Therefore, it will be vital for states parties to agree to set up a new scientific advisory mechanism for the convention as soon as possible. The establishment of a working group on the strengthening of the convention is one critical step forward. It serves as a significant forum to discuss effective, concrete, and also practical actions on key areas such as verification and compliance, as well as capacity building and international cooperation and assistance. It is only by making the convention more robust and that we can ensure it will remain fit for purpose in the rapidly evolving and changing world today. Steps have been taken to diversify the stakeholders involved in the implementation and strengthening of the convention over the past 50 years. My office continues to conduct a range of activities to strengthen, for example, regional capabilities, and support the universalization and effective implementation of the convention, particularly in Africa. Young scientists from the Global South have been engaged and empowered through the Youth for Biosecurity Fellowship, which has established a global network of over 100 participants over the last 5 years. Such efforts have been critical for raising awareness and fostering ownership amongst policymakers and also relevant stakeholders, boosting global capacities for biosafety and biosecurity. So, in its 50th year, the convention welcomed its 188th state party. The near universal adherence to the instrument enshrines the principle that the use of disease as a weapon is not only unacceptable, but repugnant to humanity. So let's use this occasion, this opportunity, to inspire renewed determination and recognize that the use of biological weapons must not only be unthinkable, but also impossible. And I thank you very much, and looking forward to interesting substantive discussions that will follow. Back to you.
Thank you, Madam Nakamitsu, for those remarks. And I would now like to hand over the floor to Ambassador Cervone de Urso, Deputy Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Undersecretary, Melanie, Excellencies, friends, I mean, great to be here at this unique birthday. I think more than any words, the fact we have such a big gathering shows the extent BWC has made a difference in the past 50 years. And, you know, it's a birthday occasion, as I call it. So it's also important also to look, as in all birthdays, a little bit back, because we should not forget where we actually came from. I mean, it's important to remind ourselves that this was the first multilateral treaty to ban an entire category of weapons of mass destruction, setting a global norm that remains a key component of non-proliferation and disarmament architecture. We have provided significant political support, of course, particularly in terms of implementing fully the convention and also expanding it further. But it's not been only political support, there's been also significant financial and technical support behind it. I mean, amongst other things, we have supported the ISU, the Implementation Support Unit, national implementation efforts, capacity building, and you know, one flagship, if friends and colleagues allow that, I want here to underscore a little bit to all of you, is EU CBRN Centers of Excellencies. I think it's important in this day and age, in this complex global landscape, of having an initiative bringing together many of you here, 63 countries, fostering regional and international level cooperation and strengthening CBRN risk mitigation, and promoting amongst all of us here a global culture of safety and security. And I mean, and I also would like to say that since its inception in 2010, each partner country, importantly, has voluntarily joined the COE network and contributed with their know-how, skills, and unique experience. So many of you have done your bit with your own angles and your own history and policies, I would like to add. But, you know, we're not here to talk about the EU, honestly. This is far beyond us. We are delighted to see the growing number of state parties adhere to the BWC. I'm particularly delighted, and let me take the opportunity to extend a really warm welcome to our newest state parties, Micronesia and Tuvalu, who joined us last year. Comoros, our most recent member. The increasing, I think, engagement of these countries is a testament to the BWC relevance in strengthening biosafety, biosecurity, and overall international cooperation. While we, you know, it's a time to take stock and look back, we do not have time, actually. We have to also look forward, because things are changing very quickly. We must recognize that BWC has to respond to today's shifting scientific and technological landscape. The 9th BWC Review Conference sets a very ambitious course to strengthen the convention, including the establishment of 2 critical mechanisms, which, let me underline again here, many of you are well aware of it. Science and Technology Review Mechanism, which should provide impartial, expert-driven assessments of emerging scientific and technological developments relevant to the BWC, while ensuring benefits of biotechnology are appropriately used. Secondly, an international cooperation and assistance mechanism, which is to facilitate the full implementation of Article 10, enabling state parties to exchange knowledge and develop peaceful applications of biological science while upholding the Convention's fundamental objectives. I mean, we are persuaded from the side of the EU that preparations to these mechanisms have now reached a level of maturity. We need really to move forward. Convening a special conference would allow us to translate tireless efforts carried out within the BWC working group into concrete action. So really, let's move now into action is my main message today. With this step, we can strengthen the BWC's effectiveness in preventing biological threats, ensuring scientific responsibility, and contributing to global security. We really cannot wait further. Otherwise, there's a real risk, in our view, that the convention is undermined at a time when we really cannot afford it. So very much, let's hope from today's celebration, we can move to what I would call a call fraction for the future BWC Undersecretary. From our side, you can all count on us to be at the forefront of these efforts. We'll be behind you, working with all partners to ensure that we build a stronger, a more resilient BWC for future generations, that our convention remains fit for purpose for the 21st century. I look forward very much for a very rich discussion this afternoon with experts, leading diplomats, and civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Schiavone de Urso. I would also like to thank the European Union for this long-standing support that we have had for the Biological Weapons Convention. Your support has entailed many, many activities, but also mainly related to the universalization and capacity building. And the European Union's support has allowed us to organize the event that we have here today. And so we're very grateful. And I hope that you will also all be able to join us at the celebrations at the end of this event in the Serpent Bar at around 6 o'clock this afternoon. So with that, I would like to conclude the opening segment of this event. But before we move on, as this is an informal event and time is quite limited, I would kindly ask and request that any interventions during the Q&A sessions are kept to concise and to the point interventions, as there are so many of us and we want to hear from all of us. And before moving to the first substantive discussions on lessons learned and reflections of the past 50 years, I'd like to take a little bit of a liberty and break with protocol and thank the wonderful BWC team that we have here at UNODA for all of the hard work and the dedication that have brought us to these 50 years, led by Daniel Feeks and everyone else. Thank you for all the hard work that you put into this every day. So that was the liberty we can take when we're 50. Thank you so much, and on to the first panel. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Nakamitsu.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kathleen Lawand. I am executive in residence in the Global Fellowship Program at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and it is my honor and privilege to be chairing this first panel. After the inspiring and action-oriented statements we've just heard from the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs and the Deputy Head of Delegation for the European Union, this first panel is intended to look to the past. So the past 50 years of the Biological Weapons Convention, and even further behind in the past, to draw some reflections and lessons learned for the future of the convention. And to this end, we have three distinguished panelists, which I'm very honored to introduce, and I will introduce them in reverse order of their speaking. So to my left, excuse me, to my left we have His Excellency Ambassador Leonardo Bencini, who is permanent representative of Italy to the Conference on Disarmament. He was the president of the 9th Review Conference of the Biological Weapons Convention in 2022. His diplomatic career has spanned 30 years, over 30 years, during which he has served in Rio de Janeiro, Oslo, Moscow, and St. Petersburg, and he's worked on a range of UN-related matters, in addition to directing Italy's contribution to the international response to the COVID-19 pandemic. To my right is Professor Michelle Bentley. She is full professor of international relations and director of the Center for International Security at Royal Holloway, University of London. She has published 6 books on foreign policy and weapons of mass destruction, the latest being The Biological Weapons Taboo, published in 2023 by Oxford University Press and funded by a Leverhulme Research Fellowship. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And then last but not least, to my far right, Dr. Jean-Pascal Zanders is an independent researcher and consultant and a well-known expert on the biological and chemical weapons conventions. He heads The Trench, which is a research initiative dedicated to the future of disarmament. And he is also a non-resident senior research associate at the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique in Paris. And during his lengthy career, Dr. Zanders has led several chemical and biological weapons related projects, including the Bioweapons Prevention Project here in Geneva. And just to conclude this introduction, let me say that while this panel is taking a retrospective view, looking towards the past, I have asked each panelist to conclude their interventions with 2 or 3 actions they would wish to see the BWC states parties take going forward, based on the lessons learned which they will have outlined. So without further ado, I give the floor to Dr. Zanders, who will discuss the contributions of the 1925 Geneva Protocol to the BWC.
Thank you very much for this introduction, Kathleen. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here at this particular anniversary. Kathleen mentioned in her introduction that at one point I was director of the Bioweapons Prevention Project here in Geneva, and at that moment we organized the event for the 30th anniversary of the entry into force of this convention. So we are 20 years later now. But as Kathleen already indicated in her introduction, she has asked me, she knows that I'm interested in paleontology and paleoarchaeology, to dig really deep into the past, and going to our next party in June, the 100th anniversary of the Geneva Protocol, to start with that. However, I should really start a little bit earlier than the Geneva Protocol, because the first thing that really traced the path that would eventually lead to the Geneva Protocol and later the BTWC happened in 1899 in The Hague at the First Hague Peace Conference. And next to the Convention on the Laws of War on Land, there was also the Hague Declaration 4.2 on asphyxiating gases. And that was already very important because it separated out the toxic chemicals that were the product of science and the industry from poison, which were toxic substances derived from nature. At the same time, during the 19th century, also the concept of disease was being filtered out of the poison concept. But that was like the first step. And then to jump forward and skip over the First World War, we come to the Versailles Treaty of 1919, and Article 171 of that treaty forbade Germany the possession, production, stockpiling, and the importation of chemical weapons, reference to asphyxiating gases and so forth. That particular treaty was important later on because in that provision, we got for the first time the definition of a chemical weapon in what I call a 3-step process. It was the identification of the agent, identification of the delivery system, and the identification of ancillary technology necessary for that. You all know that the definition of a biological weapon, and in the BTWC, definition of a chemical weapon in the CWC, has that three-step process. That was the precursor to that. So the Versailles Treaty, that particular article, then was a direct precursor to the Geneva Protocol. Now, I'm preparing a study on Geneva Protocol to be published by June, and the only way I can define it was an accident that the Geneva Protocol came into being, but it was not an accident waiting to happen. Many things happened in the League of Nations, failures of treaties. Just to be aware, when I speak about failure, of the 25 years that the League of Nations existed, there is only one weapon control treaty that came out of that international organization, and it's the Geneva Protocol. Yet disarmament was a key aspect. Now, why is the Geneva Protocol important for the BTWC? Well, first, it established the norm that the use of chemical and bacterial weapons were prohibited. And that had a big impact because essentially, if it's prohibited, the bureaucrats in the ministries, in the capitals, when the military asked for money for the weapons, they say, why do you want me to reserve money to develop and produce weapons of which you have already decided you're not going to use them? And the weapons were pushed to the margins of the military doctrine, and that prepared the ground for disarmament. But Geneva Protocol was important also in a different respect. The negotiators in 1925 bumped into the problem of dual-use technologies because the toxic chemicals used on the battlefield were also main ingredients in the industrial production processes there. And how could you ban the exportation, because the conference in 1925 was on the arms transfers, on the arms trade. How could you ban the transfer of toxic chemicals if there is no prohibition on the weapons? So that led to the Geneva Protocol. But having to deal with the dual-use problem, the delegates couldn't solve it. After the Geneva Protocol entered into force, the League of Nations started the preparations for the World Disarmament Conference of the 1930s, and in the committees, they solved the problem. And the problem, the way it was solved, we know today as the general purpose criterion. You do not ban the toxic chemicals, you do not ban the pathogens, but you ban the purposes to which you may apply them. And the, how shall I say, the first version of the GPC, the general purpose criterion, we found in the 1933 draft treaty proposed by the United Kingdom. And of course, we have them in the BTWC and the CWC. Again, why was the Geneva Protocol important to, and still is important to what we are doing? It lays the foundation, it gave the legal grounds to set up the UN Secretary General's investigative mechanism at the time of the Iran-Iraq war, when chemical weapons were used in great quantities. And also the language of the Geneva Protocol we can find in the 1998 Treaty of Rome and in, of course, the foundational document for the ICC. So Kathleen asked for a couple of action points to conclude. Well, looking at the negotiations of the Geneva Protocol, one of the key elements that was driving those discussions at the time were the fast developments in science and technology. And particularly with regard to bacteriological weapons, we have to bear in mind that only 25 years earlier, around 1900, the germ theory was accepted as a scientific fact. that was very recent. At that time, people knew there was something else also causing diseases, but they had not yet determined what viruses were. That would come in 1928. So the people had the sense that science was moving very fast in terms of medicine, as it was called at that time, and that there would be greater possibilities of manipulating pathogens. Closely related to that, and that's my second point, is the people struggled with verification and investigation of alleged use. This is not a new topic that we are talking about. If you were to go through the documents, you would actually see that many of the arguments put forward, much of the thinking is very parallel to what I hear in the meetings here today. And then the final aspect, another factor that was really driving the negotiations at the time was the need for security guarantees and mutual assistance. We can see this now in a combination of Article 7 and Article 10. But for the people to accept reductions in armaments, to not use them, they had to have guarantees in place concerning defense and protection, but also to have access to the lawful products and uses of chemistry and biology. And it's really interesting to see that 100 years ago, people were already discussing the issues that if we come back in August and come back in December of this year, we will hear all over again with the same arguments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jean-Pascal, and thanks for ending with those very clear action points. I think we've all taken good note of that. I now give the floor to Professor Michelle Bentley. She will talk to us about the taboo on biological weapons, the subject of her latest book. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this invite to speak today, and thanks to all of you for being here and being part of this celebration. When we consider the BWC over the past 50 years, it would be very easy to focus on certain core problems, which are now an established part of the key debates around the convention. So established, you will already know what I'm going to say, which is compliance and verification. That the convention lacks practical and tangible compliance measures, that all the text effectively says is don't do that, and that we don't possess sufficient means to know if someone actually has done that. But despite this, many people consider the convention a success. Because if we measure this as 50 years of no widespread use of biowarfare, no overt incorporation of biowarfare in state military strategies, then the convention is actually doing okay. In fact, some analysts have argued that this regime is even more successful than the regimes on nuclear and chemical aggression. So then a key lesson here is about why the BWC has been considered fundamentally effective. You know, if the convention is associated with such limitations, but that biowarfare has not emerged as some major threat, what is keeping this regime on track? And I argue that this is, at least in part, because of a taboo on biowarfare. A norm that bioweapons are so disgusting, so immoral, so beyond the limits of our toleration that this inspires a rejection of them, and which the BWC has been instrumental in both codifying and sustaining. And this taboo has long been core to our prohibition. At the time of its negotiation, then US Ambassador James Leonard said the convention was specifically designed to, quote, get a norm on the books. Scientist Matthew Messelson, also involved in negotiations, said this document had unambiguously established the taboo. And these arguments apply even more recently. Analyst Jean Gilman described the convention as a mechanism which has stripped bioweapons of all their legitimacy. And the taboo is evident in the convention's language. You know, the text calls bioweapons repugnant to the conscience of mankind, an intrinsically taboo statement, which says that rejecting bioweapons is not, some strategic calculation, but an even moral commitment. a sentiment that's part of a long normative tradition, which includes the Geneva Protocol, and also a UN commitment to prohibit all WMD, evident from its very first resolution in 1945. Now, not everyone will agree with me. Realists argue that taboos don't matter. They wouldn't accept that the taboo has and has had any real influence. That the convention has instead been motivated by a perceived lack of military utility surrounding bioweapons, or the self-interest of member states. So, for example, it's claimed that the US only supported the convention because America had unilaterally renounced bioweapons in 1969, and so wanted the world effectively on its level. And because of their faith, this lack of faith in normative influence, realists also argue that the taboo is not reliable as the means of prohibition. If the taboo is not the real explanation here, which then also means actors can't be relied upon to adhere to that norm, it would be naive, even dangerous, to prioritize the taboo as policy. Instead, that policy should aim at making biowarfare unachievable, or as against an actor's strategic interests, such as through increased investigations. But as I've just highlighted, if we can look back over the past half-century and identify a certain robustness of the convention, even where we clearly believe that realist approaches have not worked perfectly or been able to be applied perfectly, then I would maintain that the taboo is relevant. Indeed, I would say it's decisive. And then the taboo isn't just a lesson in understanding what has happened, and more specifically, what has worked in the past. If the taboo is that important, it's also a lesson that there should now be a more active part of what we do for the next 50 years, as opposed to a strategy that relies on realism at its core. Now, you may counter here that the taboo is already central to the regime. Members do support the taboo as a good thing and have recognized this as part of prohibition efforts. But here's another lesson, that this recognition has not been as extensive as it could have. While members have and do profess the importance of the taboo, this can sometimes look a bit like talking the talk but not walking the walk, especially when policies have been based on realist ideas and are still focused on the reining in of strategic interests. And while any measure precluding biowarfare will send a normative message that bioweapons are unacceptable, there is such a big difference between assuming that policies not explicitly related to norms will bring about ideation or restraint and directly engaging that restraint as policy itself. It's that second approach that needs to be taken more seriously. But that is a further lesson. Any attempt at being more serious must now also fully address what the taboo is and what it means. Because to the extent that the taboo has been acknowledged, the regime has radically oversimplified this. The taboo is discussed in two basic terms of non-use, non-possession, particularly a norm, that it merely rules out biowarfare as something that you do not do. But my research shows that a taboo is more complex. A taboo is much stronger than and different to a basic prohibitive norm, because a taboo is a prohibitive norm that is also driven by three things: disgust, stigmatization, and fetishization. So that, biowarfare is inherently disgusting. It's yucky. And this is a repugnance that goes beyond the conscience of mankind to the physical. Disease invades our body. It's invisible. It literally gets under our skin and is uniquely abhorrent as a result, especially for contagious agents, where the spread of infection is particularly repulsive. And that because of this repulsion, biowarfare is stigmatized as unacceptable. It's set apart as abnormal, unconventional, a special form of warfare, and must be rejected because of this difference from the conventional. And also biowarfare is then fetishized as exceptional compared to that conventional, as we would see in the classification of bioweapons as WMD, but which is also evident in popular cross-cultural psychologies about disease and infection. Just think about why pandemic movies like 28 Days Later did so well at the box office. Because biological harm is this standout, distinctive threat. And this is all so much more than just something you shouldn't do. And it's also so much more than definitional semantics. This is a roadmap for revised policy, which would look very different than if we continue to assume, as we have, that the taboo just means that biowarfare is bad. Because it's a roadmap that says our aim is not just to repeat that biowarfare is wrong, but to engage with the exact specifics of why it is wrong, leading to policies more tailored to the motivations at play and based on new policy questions, such as how can the regime exacerbate disgust, specifically that unique disgust associated with disease, to make biowarfare less thinkable, involving policies based not on realist strategic calculation, but feelings, to maximize the emotion of disgust. And how can the regime increase the perceived abnormality of disease to strengthen stigmatization? And also, how can it bolster fetishization to make actors believe that biowarfare is not just wrong, but an excessive wrong that will never, ever be tolerated? And two action points that come out of these lessons are then these. First, that policymakers must give full credit as to how the taboo has comprised an essential aspect of this regime, and that the taboo should then be made a clear priority on this basis. We talk about strategic compliant options such as confidence building and also increased verification, and these options are important. But if we accept that the taboo is equally as important based on the experience of the past 50 years, we must also directly engage that taboo and not just treat this as some nice idea or a convenient add-on. And second, that this policy engagement must be revised to fully recognize what the taboo is, where this has been ignored in the past, thereby limiting what the taboo can do for us. It is not enough to state that biowarfare is bad. To go back to the start of my talk, we cannot simply say, don't do that. The regime must now engage deeply with the detail behind the taboo to establish a more complex policy framework where this provides new avenues for success in taking the BWC forward. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Bentley. You've given us a lot of food for thought there. And then without further ado, I pass it on to Ambassador Bencini. He will draw from the lessons of the more recent past, based notably on the experience of the 9th Review Conference. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Very interesting presentations that we've just heard. Since we're talking about the past, I'm going to talk about the 9th Review Conference that I had the honor to chair. I would like to just mention 4 lessons learned from that conference. Maybe there are more, but 4 is enough, I believe. And these can be useful for future negotiations, not just within the BWC, but more in general in disarmament negotiations. So lesson number 1, do not let unfavorable conditions bring you down. The 9th BWC Review Conference took place in an international context that could have hardly been more challenging. Well, this is what we thought at the time. Perhaps now it might be even more challenging. But besides the long-standing deadlock on several disarmament negotiations, including on biological weapons, of course, the war in Ukraine had further exacerbated divisions. And also a few months earlier in New York, the 10th Review Conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty failed to achieve a consensus, final consensus outcome. And that also added to the general pessimism. But against all odds, the states parties to the BWC found consensus on a final document. We could have achieved more, but we could have also achieved nothing. So what we did achieve in the end was generally seen as a success and a glimmer of hope, in the words of the UN Secretary General. A corollary to lesson number 1 is never give up. So when the going gets tough, do not stand up and call it a day. On the contrary, remain seated and sit until late at night, when mere physical and mental exhaustion can in fact make positions more mellow, but you realize that the morning after. But this can produce results that would be visible at a later moment. And also, do not misinterpret negotiating tactics as stumbling blocks. More often than not, these are just temporary setbacks that are part of the normal ups and downs of such complex negotiations. And red lines sometimes can prove in the end to be just orange. So let's not over-dramatize. Lesson number 2, be pragmatic. Don't be maximalist. Prepare to sacrifice something in order to move forward. At some point towards the end of the negotiations, we realized there would be no easy agreement on an important and extended part of the draft final document, the solemn declaration and the article-by-article review. That was, the bulk, actually, of the final document. But time was running out. We could have insisted, but then we might have lost all. So we made the deliberate decision to simply drop the entire part. It was not either easy, not or pleasant, but by doing so, we were able to move forward on the decisions and recommendations part and reach consensus on the institution of the working group on the strengthening of the BWC. Lesson number 3, have a good bureau. And by bureau, I mean committee chairs and facilitators. We put together a geographically well-balanced, cohesive team of young, competent, and committed diplomats. And that proved to be a winning point. We also had the most gender-balanced bureau in the history of the BWC. The chairs of the Committee of the Whole and the drafting committee were 2 women. Half of the facilitators were women. This well-balanced and competent team had the necessary credibility to reassure delegates, build bridges and consensus, and it contributed in no small part to the success of the review conference. And the last lesson, lesson number 4, look beyond the usual well-known divides. This is the multilateral system. This is the UN. Of course, countries from a certain region tend to group around common positions and a shared vision. But if we want to give global solutions to global problems, and what can be more global than a pathogen spreading, we have to build bridges, not dig trenches. Cross-regional is the key word. And again, another corollary to this is the system must be inclusive. The BWC must be and will be universal, and it is very close to becoming so. Actually, it is one of the treaties with the most states parties. So every country has a stake in this, and every country should participate. And finally, some comments on one of the goals that we set out for ourselves at the 9th Review Conference. We agreed on a clear roadmap for the entire 4-year review cycle, leaving open the possibility of an early harvest in 2025. I believe there is still time for this early harvest. It won't be easy, but we can do it. In fact, the progress that we have, the progress that has been so significant within the working group, thanks also to the chair that here present, that the idea of a special conference in 2025 to decide on the 2 mechanisms is now widely supported. I'm not sure that there is consensus yet, but there is clearly an important momentum that needs to be preserved and enhanced despite the inevitable temporary setbacks typical of such negotiations. Besides the 2 mechanisms, there is another key area where progress will need to be made within the working group, and that is, of course, the topic that was mentioned earlier of compliance and verification. On this particular point, several ideas are on the table, and there is still time to find common ground also on this topic so that by the 10th review conference, by the time the 10th review conference convenes in 2027, the working group will be able to present meaningful recommendations. This is the challenge that we face now. And in conclusion, let me say that what we are celebrating today is not only 50 years of BWC, but also 50 years without any massive use of biological weapons. And of course, the convention contributed in no small part to this. However, I would like to repeat the words of my closest statement at the last BWC working group session. If a biological weapon were to be used on a large scale tomorrow, we would be caught completely unprepared, or if not completely, very unprepared. The world will look at us and would ask, what have you done to prevent this? And this is all the more reason to act now and complete the work we started at the 9th Review Conference. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bencini, for those very practical remarks. And I think many of the lessons learned you identified are really challenges and actually excellent lessons for all multilateral negotiations. So really a lot of things to take over to other contexts as well, and certainly to take forward for the BWC. With this, I will open it up to questions. I think we will have about 10 minutes. I know we're running a little bit behind time, but we'll take about 10 minutes for questions. Maybe before, and just to give people a chance to put their flags up, I could mention, picking up on what Ambassador Bencini said about the importance of taking forward the discussions on verification and compliance, that the GCSP is currently running a 2-year project to support the work of the BWC on compliance and verification through a series of workshops for government officials. 3 workshops have been held so far, and a 4th will be held. So the next one will take place in June in Addis. So with that, I don't see. I can maybe add about while you're still thinking, the GCSP workshops will end with some recommendations. So that will be the output of these workshops, which will be brought to the MSP at the end of this year. Recommendations for verification mechanisms for the BWC. Voilà. Any questions or comments for our distinguished panelists? Please go ahead. Just identify yourself and speak into the microphone so the online people can hear. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. John Zaracostas, I'm a correspondent for The Lancet and also France 24 English channel. I was wondering if the experts can elaborate what has happened during this 50 years and what happened before the convention came into force in terms of bioweapons testing, and what happened in the intermediate between 1975 onwards. Have any pathogens been reverse engineered and weaponized? Thank you.
That's a great question. Unless there are I don't see any other flags, so I'm turning to my right because I think Jean-Pascal would have something to say about this. Go ahead, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that great question. Yes, there have been quite a few biological weapon programs, particularly during the Second World War when things started, and afterwards during the Cold War. But as I think Professor Bentley has indicated, in 1969-1970, the United States unilaterally ended its biological weapons program, and in 1970 also added the toxins to it, and that really prepared the ground to move forward with the negotiations of the BTWC. On the whole, I would say, yes, there have been incidents of biological weapon use already in the First World War. There were sabotage operations mostly against animals and agriculture. In the Second World War, we know of some major biological warfare operations and, of course, the human experimentation that was undertaken. But the one thing, a wonder for me is, 50 years ago today, 1975, the BTWC entered into force. And do you have an idea how many fatalities we have recorded since that day? Fewer than 100. The people think differently about it. Perhaps they have different impressions. But of those fewer than 100 incidents, which include crime and terrorism and so forth, I was going to say most are actually criminal, and most of the incidents involve toxins rather than pathogens. So in other words, many of the aspects that we have to deal with today are related to the governance of the science, the life sciences, and the biotechnology to prevent that actually they get misused for, say, hostile or aggressive purposes. But the greatest challenges we have had are from natural disease. Think of the so-called Spanish flu of 1918, also the typhus pandemic in Europe between 1916 and 1923, and our experiences with COVID. And the roots today, we really have to worry about, the biosecurity and the biosafety in the laboratories and other installations, because accidents could actually be a far greater worry there. So that's my quick answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Zanders. Any other, no? So I guess we're ready to move on to the next panel, unless, yeah, I think we're done. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the, oh, sorry, please. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Diego Ruiz, and I'm from Mexico, but I'm here as part of the 24 participants of the UN Disarmament Fellowship of 2025. And I want to thank all the speakers for this very interesting presentation. I have a question for Professor Bentley. I really like the argument that you made about the taboo that led to the prohibition of the weapon, and how once that taboo, based on the moral repugnance of the weapon, leads to a legal prohibition that is established in conventional law, is something that makes advance these processes. And I guess to some extent that happened with chemical weapons, or to a certain level with anti-personnel mines, or with cluster munitions. But my question is, what are the reasons that this moral taboo has not been applied to nuclear weapons, even if the experience shows the repugnancy of the weapon? And why this argument is rejected by considerations of deterrence? And why in the case of biological weapons, the deterrence policy or the deterrence theory around the use of the weapon was not, I guess, not really relevant, and that taboo that you mentioned was possible to be built in order to then translate it into a codification in the law. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Although I think I'm going to start by disagreeing with you. I think there is a taboo on nuclear weapons, and this has been, in part of Nina Tannen's world work on nuclear weapons. I mean, admittedly, she does say the taboo is only on the first use of nuclear weapons. She doesn't apply it to possession although in her earlier work, I mean, that book came out in 2007, into 1997, she said it did apply to possession. And quite frankly, I think she got it right the first time. Don't tell her I said that. But, you know, she has applied this same kind of idea of repugnance and moral rejection to nuclear weapons. And I think that's something that we've seen, particularly in the nuclear ban treaty. I mean, that is all about stigmatization. Particularly around trying to highlight the humanitarian implications of nuclear warfare as trying to feed into this stigmatization. Something I think perhaps the Biological Weapons Convention could learn from in how the ban treaty is trying to construct this, because this is such a big part. You know, that treaty says, you know, this is not just about, again, strategic calculation. It's not just about MAD. There are these humanitarian, moral, emotional aspects of this that we need to develop as policy itself. You know, it's not just an idea that goes along with it. That treaty is actually ingraining this as the treaty. And I think that's the really interesting, another real interesting lesson that the convention could learn in how we start to ingrain the Tupu more into the prohibitions on biological warfare. But thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we have, yes, Peru. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, and thanks to all the panelists for their very informative presentations, and particularly I'd like to thank Ambassador Bencini for his 4 lessons that have been well taken care of, well taken note of. I thought I would seize the opportunity of having Dr. Zanders, who brought us back to more than 100 years ago and talked about the development of the 1925 Geneva Protocol, and ask him whether there are some provisions of this treaty that are still relevant in the modern world, and whether some of the provisions of the 1925 Geneva Protocol could help compliance with the BWC. So how do those two legal regimes interact, particularly for those countries as Peru that are parties to both? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. The Geneva Protocol is obviously still in force after 100 years and is very relevant. We should think, if one looks at the BTWC and at its full title and Article 1, for example, you will see that use is not covered in that. But use is prohibited through the Geneva Protocol. Of course, since then, through the review conference, most notably in 1996, the 4th review conference has adopted the language under Article 1 to say that the prohibition in Article 1 obviously applies to use too. But that was a situation because the Chemical Weapons Convention, I mean, the negotiations hadn't even started, and people were afraid back in the 1960s and the 70s to undermine the authority of the Geneva Protocol. And as I've briefly mentioned towards the end of my presentation, the UN Secretary General's investigative mechanism has its legal foundation in the Geneva Protocol, and also the use of poison, well, not poison, but chemical weapons and biological weapons is criminalized under the Rome Statute using the language of the Geneva Protocol, not the language of the BTWC and the CWC that were already in force at the time, but everybody knows what the reason was for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pascal. I think we'll end it here just because we're running out of time, I believe, for the next panel. But so please join me to thank our panelists for these very informative and insightful interventions. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. So we will now proceed to the second session of this event. And first, I would like to introduce myself. I am Hope Reyes. I am third secretary and the disarmament focal point of the Philippine Permanent Mission here in Geneva. I also currently serve as the friend of the chair for the International Cooperation and Assistance Mechanism. So previously we spoke about the past of the convention, and now we will be discussing the current status or the current trends in this in the Biological Weapons Convention. But first, I would like to introduce our members of the panel. First is Ambassador Federico Mayer. He is currently the chairperson of the working group of the Biological Weapons Convention and also the permanent representative of the Mission of Brazil to the Conference on Disarmament. He also previously served as the ambassador to Kazakhstan and also to Morocco. He also served as the alternate permanent representative to the UN in New York, as Consul General in Guangzhou, and as ambassador to Israel. Our next speaker is Dr. Felipa Lensos. She is currently the Associate Professor in Science and International Security with a joint appointment in the Department of War Studies and in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine of the King's College London. She leads several research projects and directs the MA in Science and Internal Security. She's also a member of the WHO Health Security Interface Technical Advisory Group and serves as the NGO coordinator for the Biological Weapons Convention. She's also the advisor and mentor on the Young Women in Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Mentorship Program. She will be joining us online. On my left side is Ms. Musonda Madonna. She is a biosafety and biosecurity advisor in the Zambia Ministry of Health. She's also a regional biorisk management expert and a biosafety biosecurity trainer. She is a thought leader, enthusiastic about developing sustainable healthcare systems to prevent public health emergencies and reduce their impact. She has worked with the Zambia Ministry of Health and local and international cooperation partners to strengthen biorisk management systems and ensure implementation of feasible approaches in assessing and managing biorisks in different portfolios. So, okay, it's time for the ambassadors to speak, so I will give him the floor.
I was just informed that my glucose is very high. Thank you. And I'm very happy that Hope is one of the friends of the chair because she's my hope in the the work of the working group. Excellencies, colleagues, friends of the chair, friends of the convention, and the IUCU members. 50 years ago, the Biological Weapons Convention affirmed a foundation norm. The achievements of the life sciences must never be turned to hostile purposes. Its entry into force marked a singular moment in the evolution of international law, establishing a prohibition that reaches beyond the battlefield and into the laboratories, storage facilities, and production lines of almost every nation. Since then, the world has changed at an astonishing pace. Advances in gene editing, protein synthesis, and artificial intelligence have revolutionized what is scientifically possible and dramatically lowered the threshold of access. Knowledge, once guarded by state programs, now circulate globally, shaping a biosecurity ecosystem in which intentions matter as much as capabilities, and in which threats can emerge far from traditional centers of power. While science propels itself forward at breakneck speed, diplomacy often treads with caution. The gap between what laboratories can now do and what institutions are prepared to govern grows by the year. We must ask with honest concern whether our grandchildren will gather in 2075 to discuss similar absences. The question is not rhetorical. It's a mirror held up to our resolve. In transformed landscape, the relevance of the convention grows. Its language may belong to another area, but its scope continues to expand. The BWC endures because it offers a legal and political framework where scientific development and international security are seen as complementary imperatives. The Convention has long stood with modest institutional tools. It operates without a verification regime, without a permanent body of experts, without a fully autonomous secretariat. And yet, it has remained a normative anchor in the field of biological disarmament. The Releasians reflects a consensus reiterated over decades that the prohibition it codifies is absolute. Today, the working group on the strengthening of the WC is shaping a new phase. Discussions under its mandate have progressed with purpose and ambition. Two mechanisms, one dedicated to international cooperation and assistance, and the other to science and technology, have emerged as instruments that can reinforce implementation and prepare the ground for future innovations, including verification. These mechanisms are being designed as platforms for engagement, repositories of expertise, and interfaces between policy and science. The architecture follows the principle that form must follow function. Their flexibility reflects an understanding that biosafety and biosecurity now overlap, that public health and disarmament must speak to one another, and that early warning systems depend on networks that connect laboratories, agencies, and governments. Many of the contributions compiled in the commemorative volume, the BWC at 50, published by UNODA in February, supports reading. Filippa Lentzus and Ambassador Benzini underline the need for institutional responsiveness to scientific acceleration. And Dr. Okolo and Dr. Wong insist on bridging the divide between security and life sciences. James' review points to the centrality of knowledge sharing. These insights converge around a shared institution. The BWC will remain effective if it becomes more present, more interconnected, and more technically equipped. Discussions within the working group have shown that, even in adverse geopolitical climate, substantive progress is possible. Verification has entered the agenda no longer as a distant aspiration. The science and technology mechanism, as currently envisioned, can provide a foundation for anticipatory assessment. The international cooperation mechanism can build trust and capacity. Together, they represent a path forward, not a shortcut, a structure that grows with time and delivers relevance with continuity. Elsewhere, other fora have begun to treat biosecurity with increasing sophistication, from pandemic responsible initiatives to laboratory safe frameworks multilateral discussions have multiplied. The BWC cannot remain silent in that conversion. Its voice must be informed, confident, and timely. Half a century after its entry into force, the Convention continues to assert the simple proposition that biology should not be weaponized. That proposition remains valid, but validity is not enough. What's required is presence of mind, of institution, of resources. In a time when laboratories produce data at speeds inconceivable a decade ago, and when algorithms can simulate threats with unprecedented precision, governance must move from static declaration to structured engagement. The BWC remains our moral and legal compass in times of biosecurity uncertainty. Its silence, often mistaken for weakness, has in truth preserved a clarity of principle that newer regimes still seek to emulate. But clarity alone no longer suffices. As state parties, as custodians of this norm, we now have the opportunity and the responsibility to shape institutions to match the magnitude of today's challenges. The 50th anniversary allows us to set our sights on what lies ahead. A convention that lives is a convention that acts. A convention that endures is one that adapts. The BWC deserves to be celebrated not just for having lasted, but for still offering direction and ambition. Wrought in reason and tempered by hope, may such instrument of peace endure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mayor. That is a good statement on the future. The question. Thank you very much, Ambassador Mayor. That's a good statement on the question you posed on the future of the convention, and also how it should adapt with the changing of the times, and the importance of the two mechanisms that you have mentioned, and the power and the ability that we have to shape the future of the convention. Maybe later on we can delve on that with your questions or any intervention from our guests in the room. But right now we will move on to Dr. Filipa Lensas, who will be joining us online. Ready?
Thank you so much.
Dr. Lensas,
can you hear
please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Hope, and a very warm hello.
I think we need
here,
to
BWC
put on
community.
our earphones. Okay.
I'll start again if
Okay,
everyone's
yes,
ready.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Hope, and a very warm hello, dear BWC community from a very sunny London, and the last week of term here at King's College London. And a special welcome to the Disarmament Fellows, who I understand are also in the room. It's great to have you join us. I'm sorry not to be there in person with you all, but I'm grateful that UNODA has at least made remote participation possible. So thank you to UNODA and to the EU for arranging this occasion to celebrate our remarkable treaty. Thank you for the invitation to speak, and thank you for the excellent previous panel for its historical reflections and for getting our celebrations off to such a good start. I'm going to gently shift us over to this contemporary setting. And to do so, I'd like to actually bring up a historical parallel. So with your indulgence, I will briefly linger just a moment longer in the historical context, which frames this very special day. It was just over 50 years ago that molecular biologists developed the first tools of genetic engineering. And with them, the ability to rewrite the genetic code and possibly create in test tubes organisms that had never before existed. At the time, it seemed, as commentators pointed out in the popular press, as though molecular biologists had reached the edge of an experimental precipice that may ultimately prove equal to that faced by nuclear physicists in the years prior to the atomic bomb. So rising to that occasion, prominent molecular biologists organized. They began dialogues in the pages of leading scientific journals and in person at scientific meetings, culminating in the well-known Asilomar meeting in February of 1975. The scientists called for an immediate suspension of certain classes of experiments because they were not considered safe, and their consideration of potential hazards later formed the basis for the US National Institutes of Health guidelines on recombinant DNA research, which became adopted throughout much of the world. The dialogue in the early 1970s scientific community did not consider security aspects or the misuse of genetic engineering for biological weaponry, because that aspect had been taken care of by the diplomatic community. The BWC had been agreed in 1972 and was entering into force just a few weeks after the Asilomar meeting. The BWC embodied not only the legal prohibition on deliberately using biology to cause harm, but also the long-standing norm against weaponizing disease, or the taboo that Michelle Bentley elaborated on for us. The BWC's prohibition presented a clear red line on biological weapons. No debate was needed on that point. And that ban, the prohibition on biological weapons, was and remains comprehensive. The BWC comprehensively covers harm with all kinds of pathogens, whether they're naturally occurring or genetically modified, or whether you strip them down to their active components. And importantly, biological weapons have not been used in war since the BWC came into force. Today, the biological risk landscape is becoming increasingly complex and challenging. There are more labs, more people, more money than ever before going into the life sciences and into research on dangerous pathogens. Scientific developments are making it easier to manipulate DNA and genes, and even to manipulate entire organisms. And technologies are enabling us to do this faster and in ways we haven't been able to do previously. Technologies are also enabling us to make pathogens from scratch. And they're lowering barriers to actors wanting to do all of these things. Concurrent game-changing technologies like AI and machine learning that have significant impacts on life science activities are also rapidly evolving. With all of this come opportunities, but it also brings security risks. And these security risks sit in a wider context that go beyond science and technology. I'm thinking in particular of geopolitics and the current international security environment, which is, as you are all too aware, in upheaval. We are seeing a historic rise in global conflict. The global arms trade is surging. There are those who argue we're entering a new era of violence. We're witnessing use and threats of use of unconventional armory. Information manipulation is rife and increasing, breeding uncertainty, affecting behaviors and challenging democracies. And allegations of military biological activities are starting to normalize, which weakens the BWC. Yet despite all this, there are no indications the norm against the deliberate use of biology to cause harm is faltering. Unlike in the nuclear field, where nuclear weapons are often paraded on full display and claimed essential for national security, there is not a single country that claims it needs biological weapons for its security. And we see the same idea in other disarmament domains too. Yet the norm remains firm, and the BWC holds the line even as the world becomes more disordered, more unstable. The taboo still holds. Of course, we mustn't be complacent. We must move into action as Ambassador D'Urso told us in the opening remarks. And sustaining a norm takes effort. And you, as disarmament diplomats, know that better than most. Building bridges rather than digging trenches, as Ambassador Bencini so neatly captured it, involves long and frustrating hours in meeting rooms and with others who may have very different views and agendas to yourself. And there is often no tangible result. And this effort takes a toll. I want to acknowledge this and to thank each and every one of you for the grit and the resilience that you bring to biological disarmament. Your efforts, your quiet endurance make significant contributions to maintaining multilateral dialogues on biosecurity. It is important to acknowledge, too, the larger framework within which the BWC operates and which supports the BWC prohibition. I'm thinking particularly of the Geneva Protocol, which Jean-Pascal Sanders spoke about, UN Security Council Resolution 1540, the UNSGM, the Rome Statute, and the ICC. We're also indebted to coalitions of the willing who are helping to support the ban, the red line, in multiple concrete ways that make a real difference on the ground to making biological weapons unachievable. The Australia Group ensures equipment and materials don't fall into the wrong hands. The Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons of Mass Destruction supports biosecurity projects, including lab upgrades, training and development of best practices. The WHO, the World Organization of Animal Health, the International Experts Group of Biosafety and Biosecurity Regulators, the Biosafety Level 4 Zoonotic Laboratory Network, and so many other initiatives and network all support the BWC. Let me close by returning to where I started, to the science and to the role of the scientific community. The BWC has proven to be remarkably durable. Cutting-edge developments in genome editing and next-generation biotechnology, far beyond the imagination of the diplomats crafting the treaty, continue to be covered by the BWC because of its deliberately broad scope. The treaty's focus on the general purpose criterion, as Jean-Pascal was telling us, that all treaty-relevant activities must be for prophylactic, protective, or other peaceful purposes. That general purpose criterion means that it doesn't matter what scientific and technical advances we have. What matters is intent. And this future-proofs the scope of the treaty. So the treaty is robust and will remain so. But it is only as strong as it is implemented in practice. And this brings me back to the scientific community. The scientific community is one of the most important stakeholders we have in the BWC. It is essential that we encourage and support their responsible use of biology. In my view, we have seen increases in awareness, in interest, and in engagement from scientists and tech developers, from their institutions, from funders and publishers in biosecurity, and in keeping their science and technologies safe, secure, and responsible, echoing social commitments of the pioneers of molecular biology that we saw all those years ago. So I'd like to end on a personal note. One of the driving forces behind my own engagement is a desire to develop understanding of the social context of biological threats and our responses to them. And through this broader understanding, to strengthen the next generation's resolve that biological weapons are not developed or used. In my work, I highlight how biological weapons are the products of particular technological, political, and cultural contexts, but also that biological weapons are impacted by individual choices and values. My message in my work and today is that individuals and their moral frameworks matter, whether those individuals are diplomats, civil servants, practitioners, scientists, or security experts. The efforts of all of us matter in our continued work to create a lasting ban and to sustain the moral abhorrence against these weapons. I thank you so much for your attention and turn back over to you, Hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lensos, for your statement. And thank you as well for for giving us your insight on how the convention figures now amidst the current global security and environment and developments in science and in emerging technologies such as AI. I would also like to acknowledge your comment on the important role of diplomats and the scientific community in the promotion and the strengthening of the convention. So right now, I turn the floor to Ms. Mandona on her statement. Thank you.
I'm not sure. Yes, yes. All right. Good afternoon once again, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important conversation. I believe, to start with, that no celebration is complete without an unhealthy dose of positivity. So that is what I will deliver this afternoon. So the BWC turns 50 this year. This treaty may be considered old, but is also new for people like me who have experienced it or joined the community in recent years. The optimism with which young people approach the BWC is often met with a painful dose of realism from the community in relation to what is deemed as progress in the working group and meeting of state parties. Thankfully, young people are resilient. Within the grounds of the Palais des Nations, being present may look like attending and contributing to the topics in the working group meetings and MSPs, using diplomacy as a tool while leveraging advancements in science carefully to strengthen implementation of the BWC. Outside of the Palais, we are present in our own unique ways, doing the small, medium, and large things that it takes to make a difference. Being present looks like designing and implementing awareness-raising activities around the BWC, building capacity within national teams to review and align practices in keeping with global norms, developing legislation that supports national implementation of the BWC. It looks like including a training module focused on the BWC in the National Biosafety and Biosecurity Curriculum, as we have done in Zambia, or developing a biosafety handbook for students, as one of my Youth for Biosecurity alumni, Dr. Judith, has done in Nigeria. Initiatives such as the Youth for Biosecurity Fellowship and the Advanced BWC course supported by UNODA and the NTI Bio-Youth Delegation enable young scientists like myself to be meaningfully present. The Youth for Biosecurity Fellowship is aimed at empowering young biosecurity leaders from the Global South to learn and lead, think and act, and engage with the community to build solution-oriented networks. The Advanced BWC EDU course provides the essential knowledge, skills, and expertise to actively participate in the BWC diplomatic process, and thus contribute to a stronger and more effective convention. The challenges with advancing the universalization of the treaty and attaining consensus on crucial articles of the convention are here, but so are we, young people willing to move the needle, to appeal to capital, scientists and researchers to make the right choices when it comes to biological disarmament. That a biosafety and biosecurity advisor from Zambia is here, contributing to this conversation as we commemorate 50 years of the convention, is testament to the progressive steps we have taken in universalization of the BWC. It should give us hope that perhaps being where we are with the BWC is only bad if we lose the drive to see the vision of the treaty through. So we are here at 50 years, committing to actively build a community that will celebrate different milestones at 100 years of the treaty, and we will continue to fuel the fire, determined for the sake of all mankind to exclude completely the possibility of biological agents and toxins being used as weapons by playing our small role. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mandona, and also thank you for enumerating and elaborating the concrete and current efforts to implement the convention and as well the important role of youth participation. So I guess now's the time for maybe a couple or more questions for our members of the panel. I think we have a bit of 5 to 10 minutes to accommodate the questions if anyone has or any intervention that you would like to make. Yes, our delegate from China.
Thanks for giving the floor, and also thank the UNODA for hosting this event commemorating the 50th anniversary of BWC, which we think plays a very important role in humanity's effort to safeguard peace and security and promote the common cause of development and prosperity. I also thank the panelists that discuss the presentation, especially Ambassador Mayer's presentation on the work of the working group and his able leadership for steering the working group. Biosecurity concerns all humanity and therefore needs the joint efforts of the whole international community. China attaches great importance to the global biosecurity governance, and just as Chinese President Xi proposed the global security initiative, advocating the joint response from all countries to biosecurity and other global challenge. In spirit of this, we participated very constructively in the work of the working group, and looking forward to the positive outcome of the working group. So my question goes to Ambassador Mayer. Besides the two mechanism on ICA and SAB, as you mentioned in your presentation, there's also other priorities for the delegations. For example, the verification mechanism, or say the compliance and verification, which is believed to be the most effective way to guarantee the compliance of the BWC. So my question is how to promote the establishment of two mechanisms at the same time to promote, to deliver the mandate of the working group in a comprehensive way, in a comprehensive and balanced manner, so we can find a solution or pathway for the working group, for to handle the seven the topics of the working group, so we can guarantee some positive outcome this year or hopefully next year. Thank you.
Thank you, China, for your question. At this point, maybe I'd like to take one more. Okay, from the UK. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you to everyone involved in bringing together this important event. And can I just take the opportunity to thank those of you in the room, whether you are diplomats, academics, scientific experts, for coming together today, not only today, but more generally, to try to work on this vital issue. In that last panel, we heard about the crucial role that science plays in helping diplomats and negotiators to understand the emerging threats that we face and how we might respond to those threats to ensure that we remain as safe over the next 50 years as we have been over the previous 50. I, like you, Mr. Chair, Ambassador, am an optimist by nature, but If we continue to face challenge with achieving consensus on creating a mechanism that can furnish governments and diplomats with the scientific knowledge that is necessary for ensuring we're all safer, my question to the panelists is, what alternatives are open to us? How else might we draw from and benefit from the huge amounts of scientific expertise that is so vital to our policy making in the years to come? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Riley. So if there are no other questions, I will turn over to Ambassador Mayer, and also if there's other members of the panel who would like to take on the questions. So Ambassador Mayer, please.
Okay, thank you, Hope. Well, I started with my colleague from the UK. Well, as I say in all our meetings, optimists and pessimists, they die in the same way, but they live differently. I'm in the optimist side. I think the alternative is to work. You see, it's and find consensus, because, of course, we all were here sitting in these rooms, be scientists, diplomats, experts, military, whoever. Of course, every meeting, when we pass it by that door and we enter in that door, we have different opinions, different aims, different instructions. But since League of Nations or UN, as soon as we sit here, we talk. Diplomacy is this. We talk and we look for alternatives. Because my personal view is that the BWC was a little bit sleeping, and COVID made it wake up. You see? And so more than ever, we realize that the world's getting very small. And we have to work together. So the alternative is to work and find common solutions. There is no other way. And again, as in our work, we have been facing the question of consensus. And again, I turn to consensus, at least when I started working in diplomacy, was something that nobody likes, but everybody can live with. And lately, consensus has been turned into a blocking system. And so I think that it's also something that we have to work. And finally, as I mentioned in the speech, diplomats are too slow. I'm a diplomat. I've been for half a century, so I can say it. We are very slow, and science is going too fast. When I started working, you would get instructions from your capital on a telex, and you go to the meeting and have to decide. And being extraordinary and plenipotentiary, you had to find solutions. Today, I'm talking here, my ministry is watching me, our colleague is here, and the ministry is sending messages. No, don't say this, say that. So, so we have to start putting a little more speed on diplomacy, because science is going so fast, and so, but the alternatives to work, to find consensus, and do our best to solve the problems. Now, when to the Chinese colleague, I I will go back to the same thing. What should we do on verification, on the difficult themes that we are facing on the discussions? It's the same thing. Let's sit down, let's talk. And that's how we solve problems. Because we cannot be sitting in another, I mean, most of us will not be here in 50 years. So maybe we're going to be up there watching the celebration for 100 years, you know, saying, wow, this guy, those guys in 50 years, they really work it. Or you're going to say, oh, in 50 years, those guys didn't even find a solution yet. So I think that it's up to us to, not in 50 years, but maybe in 2 years, we can look at each other and say, we made it, we did it. That's my view, optimistic view.
Thank you, Ambassador Mayor. And maybe before we end, any comment or any, oh, we have another question from the floor. Yes, please.
I have mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. About the speed question, I would like to suggest that if we had a baseline agreement that is independent of any technology, and that any agreement that comes on top of that that is specific to technologies would still, you know, have to fall back on that baseline, and that baseline would be something upon which everyone is always accountable, no matter what comes on top. That could help, you know, solve that speed question, because then people would always be aware in themselves of how what they have the intention to do would reflect in that baseline. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. So maybe any of our members of the panel would like to give a reaction to that or any comment? Is Dr. Lenza still online? Or
I am, yes.
I think if there's so yeah, just the last call for any comment or for any intervention before we proceed to the next session. Okay, so going once. Okay, so thank you very much for all, and we will have a short transition to the next session, the future of BWC. Thank you.
Excellencies, colleagues, friends, thank you for staying in the room for this last panel. I am Maria Garzón Maceda. I'm a project coordinator at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, where I work on the bio workstream, and hopefully providing our mandatory dose of optimism from the Institute, as it was said in the panel before. I want to thank UNODA for organizing this event and inviting me to moderate this session. I was hearing with a lot of interest the previous panels, the previous discussion, and I hope that we can continue and spark even more inspiration amongst ourselves, talking about the future. We've heard some ideas, some pathways forward on where to take action now. And perhaps we can take it a little bit more forward and think about, well, what about the next 50 years and beyond? What we want in the long term for the convention, so we can start building it. We have 3 remarkable speakers in the room with us today. And to provide the briefest of introductions to the 3 of them, Dr. Jamie Yassif is Vice President for Global Biological Policy and Programs at NTI, where she oversees the program's work to reduce global catastrophic biological risks, strengthen biosecurity, pandemic preparedness, and global health security. We also have Peter Babigamura Ahabwe. He's an epidemic intelligence analyst and technical advisor at the Ministry of Health of Uganda. He's an experienced health diplomat with experience in the BWC, currently serving as a friend of the chair on science and technology mechanism. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sana Zakaria. She's a research leader on science and emerging technology at the RAND Corporation, where she leads RAND Europe's biotechnology policy research portfolio. So I'm looking forward to your presentations, and we'll have some time for Q&A with the audience. We don't have much time, so let's kick off with Jamie. She will be talking on enhancing transparency in the BWC, drawing on NTI BIOS work. She will explore the opportunities to enhance transparency, to build trust among states bodies, and increase confidence in BWC compliance. The floor is yours.
Is it okay? Are we good? All right. Many thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks to the Implementation Support Unit for organizing today's important discussions and for the opportunity to participate. So I'm Jamie Yassif. I lead our bio program at NTI, and I'm going to be talking about our work on enhancing transparency to strengthen the BWC. Next slide, please. So just a couple slides to motivate the work. Why is this important? So I think, as we've been hearing multiple times throughout our discussions today, the potential for deliberate misuse of the tools of modern bioscience and biotechnology poses significant threats that are evolving rapidly. And the international community does not have the tools today to address this, either to prevent states from pursuing bioweapons development or use, or to detect it if it does happen. And this is happening in an environment of basically a 21st century revolution in bioscience and biotechnology. We're seeing rapid advances in synthetic biology, genome editing, and its convergence with artificial intelligence, which is just accelerating that trend. And so there's tremendous opportunities, but also significant risks that we need to watch out for, and that makes this work important, but also challenging. Next slide, please. In terms of the timing, so we're very fortunate to be in the midst of a 5-year working group process on strengthening the convention, and there are 2 particular sub-working groups that are focused on issues that are directly salient for this set of questions. One on confidence building and transparency, one on measures on compliance and verification. It is our goal to use this political opening and this desire for advances in this thinking in this area to develop concrete ideas and suggestions that could be absorbed by these working groups and put forward as recommendations to drive progress. Next slide, please. In terms of the concept of enhanced transparency, I wanted to ground it as it relates to terms that are more perhaps familiar to folks who are thinking about in the context of the BWC. So we're familiar with confidence building measures, as well as, which is something that has been going on for quite some time, and states participate in this. And there's a desire by many states parties to reach the holy grail of full verification regime. When we talk about enhancing transparency, we see this as not as a black or white, yes or no verification, that there's a continuum of opportunities. Confidence building measures as they are currently practiced is on the modest end of that spectrum, a full verification regime is extremely ambitious. And there's a whole range of opportunities in between, and we want to look at the full range of options to not disregard meaningful opportunities to enhance transparency, even if it doesn't necessarily equate to a full verification regime as various member states understand it. And we think that's a really important and valuable way to make progress now. Next slide, please. In terms of the goals, basically, it's to build trust and compliance in the convention, both by reducing the risk of misperceptions or unwarranted suspicions that could otherwise lead to undesirable arms racing dynamics. We don't want states parties to misinterpret each other's intentions or capabilities. And likewise, we would like to make it more likely that if there is a non-compliance event, that actually we would have a decent chance of catching it. I think we need much stronger tools than we have at the moment in order to actually convince ourselves that that's true. Next slide, please. In terms of the work that we've been doing at NTI and in partnership with many experts from around the world, we're breaking this out into 3 buckets. One of them is just recognizing that we've had significant advances in science and technology and other adjacent in the life sciences and adjacent fields since the last time there was an attempt to negotiate a verification protocol. And we want to look very closely at those advances and see what kind of opportunities that they afford in order to create new knowledge, new insights, gather new kinds of information that could give us better insights into compliance than we might have been able to achieve 20 or 30 years ago. And so that's really an important foundation. And then there are procedural approaches. How do you embed? And so the examples of the scientific and technical approaches include how do we use data streams, how do we use artificial intelligence, how do we use novel biomolecular analytical methods in sampling, for example. Procedural approaches are really the sort of procedures in which we embed the data collection and analysis. It could include things like on-site inspections, off-site monitoring, open source analysis, a more formal inspection regime or something that's more ad hoc or voluntary. And then institutional structures, that's just a recognition that in order for this to be sustainable and actually work and practice, it's got to be embedded in an institutional home. Obviously, an institutional home formally attached to BWC would be ideal. We would have to build on the institutional infrastructure we have right now. But there are other options that we could also consider in order to make progress in the interim. Next slide, please. We have been working on this for a number of months. Last fall, we convened a meeting in Amsterdam with a number of experts, both from the scientific and technical community, as well as policy experts that have been working in the context of the BWC for quite some time to explore these ideas. Next slide, please. Here are some pictures from the discussions. You might recognize a few familiar faces. We were very lucky to have a really diverse group of experts participate. It was a very interactive and active discussion where we tabled ideas. We also solicited suggestions from various attendees. And so it was a really enjoyable and productive set of discussions over a 2.5-day period in Amsterdam. Next slide, please. So we are in the process of writing a report we hope to publish later this year, and we will share it with the BWC community. But in the meantime, I wanted to share sort of some initial draft recommendations that we've developed as a starting point. There are 5 of them. Next slide, please. So first of all is just defining a clear threat model. What is the problem we are trying to solve? What are the behaviors that we find concerning? What are the kinds of things we actually would want any kind of enhanced transparency mechanism to look for, given how widely distributed bioscience and biotechnology are globally, how deeply embedded they are in the bioeconomy, how fundamentally dual use they are. We can't look at everything all the time, so we've got to right-size this and scope it to a manageable level where we can meaningfully actually make useful observations. Next slide, please. Second recommendation is a specific pilot project looking at the combination of collecting open source information or publicly available information and using artificial intelligence to analyze it. And so this is a hypothesis that we think should be tested. Can we look at widely distributed data sets, images from satellites, social media data, trade data, other kinds of data, analyze it with AI and discern useful signals about activity underway in different states to give us meaningful information about compliance or potential non-compliance? This is something that NTI has done in an analogous context in the nuclear nonproliferation domain. There's a report that NTI published called Signals in the Noise. and my colleagues demonstrated that this kind of approach in an analogous context can be used to effectively detect illicit proliferation. And so we want to test that out in this context. Next slide, please. Third recommendation is trying to explore more robust data and sample collection as part of site visits. So we're all aware that there is a voluntary peer review process underway. It's a really great start. Would love to see it expand and become more robust. And I think one of the most useful ways to expand and deepen this on-site peer review process is to collect samples. Can we experiment with collecting data and samples and analysis and embed it into that process? Or could we try something in a non-governmental context, working with industry and academia, sort of to test out what on-site sampling regimes could look like to see what would work and what wouldn't work, and how is that different now than it was 20 years ago with the tools and capabilities that we have from advances in bioscience and biotechnology. Next slide, please. I think this probably will be a popular one in this room. We're also emphasizing the importance of strengthening confidence building measures, making them more modern and a more effective transparency tool. So part of it is just updating the reporting process. The forms were developed a long time ago. A lot of science and technology has changed since that point. The reporting process should really reflect that. But it's not just that, it's also building analytical capabilities to analyze data that are coming in and have a more sustained dialogue about the content of those reports, and then training and capacity building in lower and middle income countries to support CBM implementation. And finally, the fifth recommendation is more of a policy idea. And it's this notion of a joint assessment process to assess BWC compliance. And the goal would be to help states parties demonstrate and assess compliance through a process that's structured, internationally recognized, and standardized. And the inspiration is really a lot of the joint assessments that are already conducted by organization. For example, the WHO joint external evaluations. There are other assessments done by WOA through their PVS pathway, and there's IHR annual reporting. These kinds of processes are established. Can we create something analogous to these assessment processes in the context of implementing Article 4 in the context of the BWC? So that's another idea that we are going to advance. And so those are our draft recommendations. Let's go to the next slide, please. Wanted to just thank the project team that has helped advance this work and that will be our co-authors on this report. One more slide. Thank you very much for your attention. This QR code that's on the screen links to our white paper, which was a read ahead for this meeting, where we lay out a little more details about our thinking in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yassif. I think you provided a good menu of options to building trust, also reminding us that we don't need to start from scratch on everything that we are thinking about. There's a lot that has been already done that we can sustain, that we can build upon. And I really like the idea of piloting projects. I think that gives the opportunity for researchers and policy people to provide real insights and inform diplomats the best way possible, I think. So thank you very much. We're going to jump now to Peter's presentation. This presentation is on the future of international cooperation under the BWC. And focusing on Article 10 and beyond, his presentation will assess international cooperation in the BWC context, addressing both structural obstacles and possibilities that arise in an evolving landscape. Peter, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you so much, Maria. So before I start the presentation, one question: why is a pharmacist making this presentation? And on the 15th of May 2019, NTI, together with Africa CDC, convened the first Global Biosecurity Dialogue. I attended that meeting as one of the winners of the Next Gen Bio competition, and that's when I met Alex from the ISU. ISU helped me reestablish contact with our focal point in Uganda. I attended my first BWC meeting in 2019 as part of the NTI delegation as well. And all through the years that I've been part of these engagements, the mission here has been very, very helpful in making sure that all the international support that comes to me as a youth delegate or anything translates back into national action. So that's why I'm here. I've had the privilege of being a Youth for Biosec Fellow as well and a BWC Fellow with UNIDIR as well. And as diplomats, I really ask you, when people come to Geneva for these kinds of things, please take an interest to know which, when UNIDIR says we have fellows from your country, just take a minute, talk to them, find out how they're doing. Did they suffer at the airport? Are they struggling with the language? It's those little things that my mission does for me that really warms my heart and gives me the motivation to come back whenever called upon. So as I talk about the future of international cooperation and assistance, things you already know, I'm sitting in front of you as a living example of what international cooperation and assistance does. Next slide. So Uganda is in Africa, and we are in the meningitis belt, yellow fever belt. We have a large number of refugees. We have a high burden of HIV, TB. We have very rich forests. We have an airport with a lot of international travel. So for Uganda, it's very important that we manage the threat of biological weapons. We manage biological pathogens themselves. We manage the activities around biological weapons and biological pathogens. Next slide. So Article 10 matters more now than it did before. Global health crises like COVID-19 and Ebola, which we are currently dealing with, have exposed gaps in biological preparedness. Article 10 is the BWC's only provision mandating international cooperation for peaceful purposes. Now, the current geopolitical divides and technological advances heighten its relevance. It's very ironic that we are tearing each other apart while the science is running as fast as it can. Growing demand from more member states to realize the full potential in capacity building, surveillance, and equitable access is also driving this. Next slide. So, where did we come from? Article 10 was inspired by Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was intended to promote exchange of scientific knowledge and technology for peaceful purposes, and it gained even more importance after the Cold War with the rise of dual-use biotechnology. A lot of this Jean Pascal really took us through in the beginning. So since the 1980s, it's been tied to debates over equity, development, and disarmament balance. Next slide. So there are political and structural challenges that we face, ambiguity over what fullest possible exchange really means, divisions between member states on scope and obligations, lack of legal enforcement or verification framework for Article 10 implementation, and tensions over perceived inequities in access to materials, data, and research. Next slide. Export controls and discriminatory practices. Article 3 prohibits transfer of biological weapons, creating a need for export controls. Some CBRN groups are criticized for undermining Article 10 by imposing restrictive practices, and many states view controls as discriminatory barriers to peaceful research. And there's no formal BWC mechanism that exists to adjudicate disputes over denied transfers. Next slide. There are existing institutional mechanisms, assistance and cooperation database since 2011 that facilitates voluntary matchmaking. There's a sponsorship program that supports participation in meetings by developing states. Article 10 reports that though few states regularly report these, but they are there, they're mostly voluntary, and there are very many limitations. Underutilized platforms, informal engagement, and lack of visibility. And at this point, I'll also say there's also a huge lag between the cables, the modern day cables that we have these days coming from Geneva back to Capitol. It's ironic that you'd think with WhatsApp and the internet, things would move faster than they did when we had cables, but unfortunately, an advert goes out today and still 2 years later, someone is only responding with nominations. Next slide. The ICA mechanism has been a very important part of the working group. The 9th Review Conference mandated development of an Article 10 implementation mechanism. Ongoing working group deliberations explore structure, scope, and institutional design. And I reiterate Chair's saying, Christina, hope is our hope. Christina and the rest of the friends on ICA have been working very hard. And as a friend of the Chair for Science and Technology, I have to say it's been nice also discussing with them about how we can find synergies between the two mechanisms to make it easier for the diplomats to implement. Political compromise is likely needed for either to advance. Next slide. COVID-19 underscored global disparities in diagnostics, vaccines, and health security, and future Article 10 implementation must address early warning, technology transfer, and manufacturing equity. It's important to note that many efforts to introduce many of these components in the ongoing pandemic treaty negotiations that should be ending next month, hopefully successfully, have not been very fruitful, as we all know. So it comes back to the BWC to talk about these things, these hard conversations that really failed to fly in the pandemic treaty. Integration with WHO, FAO, WOA, IPPC, and other regional networks is very critical moving forward. Even if by some miracle we have an organization next year or in 2027, it will just be a very young institution. We need to explore taking advantage of the regional approaches. Capacity building should extend to preparedness, not just response. Next slide. International cooperation is no longer state-centric. I began my talk giving an example of how I've been a beneficiary of efforts from many other non-state groups. If all this was limited to what only Uganda can do, then probably I would not be sitting here right now. So civil society, academic institutions, and public-private partnerships play a growing role. And there's a catalog of civil society assistance, and we need documents how non-state actors support Article 10 goals. It's important that we find, this also I guess needs some compromise, but we need to find a way of bringing civil society and the private sector into the fold. We cannot continue to act like as if there's some illegitimate child we deny existing while still paying school fees for. Broader inclusion enhances transparency, trust, and innovation. It really does. Next slide. So just giving a flash of some of the stakeholder groups, in case it's ambiguous what I mean, country governments, regional bodies, there's a need to obsess over state. Basically, if you don't have a flag in the box, you're not a part of the group. But even regional bodies, I always ask why Africa Union is not playing a bigger role here, or Africa CDC. International organizations, foundations, private sector, academia and research centers, policymakers, healthcare providers, and community and other non-state actors. A very important group is actually healthcare providers. In many countries, we do not have institutionalized government healthcare. And you have these large groups that are really in charge of your entire healthcare system that don't have a voice. And you're coming up with things here that they'll fail to implement, and then we'll need another 50 years of negotiation to figure that out. Next slide. So what needs to change? We need to clarify the scope, expectations of Article 10, what really counts as peaceful purposes. We need to establish reporting standards and peer review for cooperation efforts. We need to develop a coordination mechanism that will engage international government organizations, NGOs, and states, and we need to move toward a legally binding, many of us don't like to hear it, legally binding framework. We will not cohabit forever. We need to get married. And for implementation and accountability, again, legally binding. We need to have a discussion on this at some point. Next slide. So future policy directions, we need to strengthen and scale the assistance and cooperation database. We need to institutionalize the ICA mechanism with clear mandates and resources. We need to encourage biannual Article 10 reporting and create an expert peer review group. We need to support regional hubs for training, technology access, and biosafety capacity building. And we need to balance national export controls with the convention's cooperative intent. I'm not saying we throw them out, but we need to balance. Next slide. So, the BWC cannot fulfill its promise without equitable, effective cooperation. Article 10 is no longer a peripheral issue. It's central to the convention's future. Its success depends on political will, institutional innovation, and inclusive partnership, and political will. I really want all of us to have political will. And the next chapter of the BWC must deliver more than disarmament. More than disarmament. I know many of us like to say, but that's my mandate. More than disarmament. It must deliver solidarity. We have an African proverb that it's only the teeth which are together that can bite the meat. We really have to stop fighting at some point. When I was not a diplomat before, I used to hear that diplomats are the people who tell you to go to hell and you ask for directions. They fight in the room and then go for drinks after. That's not what I've seen in Geneva these past few days. So for me, it's very disappointing. I was looking forward to meeting everyone at Pickwick's today, but I don't know, some of you may not come. So please, diplomats, let's go back to diplomacy the way it was in the good old days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Many important points being thrown there, including political will. You mentioned stakeholders groups, their importance, the importance of engaging them, and I want to make a little parenthesis there as well, because the present, but mostly the future, belongs to youth. So education, engagement, ensuring there's substantive engagement and listening to them is critical. Musonda mentioned this during her presentation, but I just wanted to bring that as well here in the panel about the future of the BWC. So now, last but not least, we have Sana. She'll be talking about reimagining biological weapons in light of emerging technologies. Drawing from her recent policy work, her presentation will examine how emerging technology trends are challenging concepts of what is considered a biological weapon and how we can rethink verification possibilities in parallel. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. It's fantastic to be here, and as wonderful as it is to have the last intervention on this panel, I also stand between you and drinks, so I shall try and be short and sweet. I think we truly are at an inflection point, I'd say, in terms of the rapidity with which we're seeing technological advancements play out. And they offer phenomenal benefit to humanity, but they also introduce novel risks that perhaps we haven't seen at this scale and magnitude with this speed before. And so as biotechnology, synthetic biology, AI is, top of our consciousness, and as these technologies mature, as these tools mature, I think they demand that the convention evolves in sync with modern science. And I really like what Ambassador Mayer said: a convention that endures is a convention that adapts. And the BWC has endured, and now it's time to adapt. I think the BWC, especially today, must remain a cornerstone of global biosecurity by adapting its frameworks, its mechanisms and definitions to encompass emerging technologies and not shy away from that. So I just want to offer a few reflections on what it means, what a biological weapon means in today's day and age, and what form could it come in. And we can't speak of verification and compliance unless we are clear on what is it that we're trying to look for and how can we secure ourselves against it and hold each other to account. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about how the threat as we perceive it has evolved over time. So one of the concepts is decentralization of research. So what I mean by that is that biological research with weaponization potential is no longer confined to large state-run facilities. These could also come in the form of small, well-networked labs that can access advanced capabilities thanks to the falling cost of gene synthesis, AI-driven design tools, and cloud labs. What are cloud labs? These are companies that offer remote labs as a service to individuals across the world, and it drastically lowers the barrier for conducting complex experiments from anywhere in the world. We are also seeing rapid technology spread. So if we look at the Nobel Peace Prize from 2020, 2023, with prizes awarded to scientists who came up with novel technological innovations in the form of CRISPR gene editing, AlphaFold, which is an AI-driven protein folding platform. It really illustrates how swiftly breakthroughs can become widespread because these tools came out, they're everywhere, everybody's talking about it, and there's a recognition on the utility of these things. But they also raise dual use concerns.
And the last thing I want to mention is that there's a compression of timelines. Again, a lot of people today have acknowledged that things are moving really fast. And so the diplomatic community has to move really fast, and it's super challenging to marry those two things up. Next slide, please. And not to, again, be, really scaremongering, but again, it's our job as researchers to, at least my job as a researcher, not just to think about what's unfolding today, but actually think about the future and think about tomorrow and think about the signals on the horizon. So again, I want to offer some, reflections and some provocations on things like reimagining what we mean by biological weapons. So think about things like, brain-computer interfaces, fantastic work happening there around Parkinson's, neurorehabilitation. But maybe there's a trajectory that in 10 to 30 years, brain-computer interfaces could be used to manipulate thoughts, memories. You have the, advent of concepts where, mirror biology, research that has been happening for a long time, and now scientists backing away from it to say that this is very dangerous and we would not like to continue. These are really emerging cutting-edge developments that have reached a point where the scientific community itself recognizes the inherent risks in doing some of these things. I think lists are really important. We talk about pathogen lists and prioritized lists of things to look out for, and lists where within the BWC that nobody wants to do anything. If it's mentioned on the list, it has special requirements against it. And that is great, but lists in their own right are insufficient because we talk about emerging technologies like synthetic biology and AI, and you could design novel components that are not overseen by any list. And so it's essential to focus on the list, but it's also essential to address the unknowns from these emerging techniques. And so the last point here being that what once required massive state infrastructure could be replicated by small networked labs. It's worth thinking about these things. And so next slide, please. As we move into thinking about compliance and verification in that context, there are still a lot of practical challenges to overcome, and I won't spend too long on the slide because most people here have lived and are breathing these challenges. But there's varying national capacities and capabilities for verification and for providing the kind of information that might appease or is acceptable by everybody involved in and tethered to the convention. There's also reporting burden. So there might be compliance, but it's simply not possible because of the complex process in the ecosystem. It might overwhelm state with limited resources. There's sovereignty concerns around sharing sensitive information. And then there's concerns around actually technology access itself. So verification technologies themselves might not be equally available everywhere to actually provide the kind of information that is required. So these things require a very balanced approach. And in light of that, I'd like to offer a few reflections. Next slide, please. So I think a new framing is needed to make progress, and it chimes with some of what Jamie was talking about, which made a lot of sense to me. We need to think about an indicators-based approach, moving from static list-based systems to indicator-based models that really reflects the pervasive nature of a bioeconomy. So biology is not just about health and medicines, it's everywhere. It's agriculture, it's manufacturing, it's tethered to the fabric of society in many, many ways. It's energy, it's critical infrastructure. And so the point being that we need to look for patterns across multiple domains: epidemiological, intelligence, environmental data, and look for things like, unexplained disease clusters, irregular reagent procurement. So we need to reimagine what it means to do verification and what compliance means. And so a lot of these things, of course, require prioritization. We're not going to boil the ocean. I just talked about burden. And so there's a need to look at the highest risk pathways in light of technological advancements and then conduct a deterrence cost analysis. What is the thing that is likely to deter most and be cost effective and be least burdensome in its entirety. Next slide, please. I just want to also quickly reflect on verification methods themselves. So with advancing technology, you can do a lot of things that don't require physical presence on the ground. There's remote sensing capabilities using network sensors, satellites. Again, some of what Jamie was talking about in the nuclear pilot, for instance. We have handheld sequencing devices, on-site diagnostics for doing things like environmental sampling, data analytic capabilities. And these things were inconceivable at the inception of the BWC. Right, so we've kind of come a long way since then, and it's important to think about that. Next slide, please. This is one that I know a lot of people, again, I did say I was going to offer some provocations. This is, again, another provocation. I think it's important to recognize that the national capacities vary around compliance verification. We might need to consider that tiered compliance model that pairs verification with obligations with technical assistance to build capacity and provide a graduated, nuanced view of compliance. And this could be complementary to approaches for verifying non-compliance. And binary assessment, as we've heard, overlooks the complex realities on the ground. So you have cutting-edge research that might be conducted without robust safeguards because there simply isn't enough infrastructure to invest, or there might not be knowledge, or there might not be clear foresight into the potential misuse. Most scientists I speak to do not understand how their technology that they're working on can be misused. That is just not woven into the fabric of academia. So it's important to take these nuances into account. Next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to, if I can skip onto my last slide in the interest of time. This is just a repeat of what I said. Perfect, thank you. So I just want to conclude that I think the BWC remains essential to global biosecurity, and we need to align the mechanisms with emerging technology. We need to bolster the deterrent value that it provides, and some of the adaptations and the ideas that we've talked about, some of the provocations that I've provided, hopefully can seed some ideas around addressing present and future challenges. And I think we can pursue a very practical path forward through continued dialogue, scientific collaboration, and some targeted policy measures, upholding the Convention's mission in this era of rapid technological change. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think much of what you mentioned really speaks to the importance of a structured approach towards S&T review that we have been discussing in the previous panels. And I'd like to thank you for breaking down the complexities of many of these concepts for us mortals and diplomats. But with that, I'll have a couple of minutes to take questions and comments from the floor. I already see 3, so I'm going to ask you to keep your comments and questions brief because we don't have much time. We need to finish this session. So I see the Russian Federation had his flag up. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, UNODA, for organizing this event, and many thanks to panelists for the excellent presentations. And on behalf of the Russian delegation to the BWC, on this, I've got few remarks on this panel's topic. There is no doubt that BWC is one of the fundamental elements of the modern security architecture. That as we look to the future, Convention community still faces, in our view, 2 main goals. First, it's universalization, and secondly, the strengthening of this regime. In terms of the universalization, in recent years, positive developments have been achieved, and we'd like to welcome the recent accession of to the Convention of Comoros. And as for the BW strengthening efforts are concerned, of course, it's an important milestone. There was the decision of the 9th Review Conference to establish specialized working group. This decision reflected the consensus among the states parties on the relevance and the need to develop measures that would help eliminate the shortcomings of the convention and ensure compliance with its provisions. And we believe that the top priority remains the development of a verification mechanism, without which the implementation of the provisions of the convention remains a matter of trust between the states parties. And in addition to the above said, a number of additional measures would, in our opinion, contribute to the strengthening of the BWC regime. Among them, steps on universalization of the Geneva Protocol of 1925. Today it was many times mentioned, in which the BWC is based regarding the prohibition of the use of biological weapons. Another area of work is the strengthening of mechanism of the UN Secretary General for investigating cases of possible use of chemical and biological weapons. One more thing, Kazakhstan's initiative to establish an international agency for biological security, which seems promising in terms of institutionalizing of the convention. And last but not least, the military activities of some states outside their national territories raises serious questions in the context of compliance with the BWC. This issue needs to be solved in the foreseeable future. And finally, it's also important to note that BWC is a platform for international cooperation where countries share experiences in useful practices, receive assistance in developing peaceful biotechnologies, and discuss potential risks and threats. The Russian Federation, as a depository state bearing its extent of responsibility for the BWC, will henceforward be ready to cooperate with all states parties in order to ensure the reliability, proper effectiveness, and viability of the convention's regime. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. With Daniel's indulgence, we'll take the two other interventions that have already raised their flag. Kazakhstan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie. So my question is that after 50 years of the BWC and 50 years of no use of bioweapon, by the way, it's not prohibited by in the convention, the use. What is your vision as a panelist of third session for the convention for next 50 years? Can we continue to rely on optimism without institutionalizing the convention, or it is the time to create agency or implementing organization of the BWC, as we have IEA or PCW, and then to discuss on solid ground the issues of the international cooperation, science and technology, verification, compliance, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harrison. South Africa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. The Republic of South Africa has the honor to make the following comments on behalf of the African Group. The group expresses appreciation to UNODA for convening this momentous event as we mark the 50th anniversary of the Biological Weapons Convention. We further appreciate the European Union for funding this important event. The African Group remains concerned about the political risks and impacts posed by biological threats. Our willingness to continue to pursue the peaceful uses of biotechnology is a testament to our collective resolve to promote biosecurity and biosafety in the African region. Therefore, it is in the context that the group wishes to underscore the importance of combating increasing threats of terrorism and proliferation of biological weapons. The group welcomes efforts to strengthen the convention and continues to engage constructively in the working group on the strengthening of the convention. In this regard, we call upon all states parties to work together to ensure that all states are equipped to prevent the abuse of biological sciences, and life sciences and technologies, and to promote its peaceful uses. The African Group will work together with all states parties to ensure that the working group is able to achieve its mandate as set out in the 9th BWC Review Conference, which is paramount for all African states parties. The group appreciates the project implemented by UNODA with funding from the Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction. This initiative, spanning from 2022 to 2026, aims to increase the number of African states parties to promote and enhance the submission of BWC confidence-building measures and national contact point designations by African states parties. It also sought to enhance the status of BWC implementing national legislation in countries in the region. Since the inception of this project, there have been a series of workshops undertaken, including a coordination workshop in July 2022 in Geneva, as well as 5 regional workshops covering the continent between 2022 and 2024. This has benefited all participating countries and assisted to build capacities and skills to implement the convention. Madam Moderator, we appreciate the valuable presentations delivered today across all the panels, which have reminded us about the historical importance of the BWC, the present challenges and dangers, as well as the benefits of collaboration and the promotion of the peaceful uses of biological uses. What is evident is that the convention remains an invaluable contribution to ensuring a world that is peaceful, prosperous, and united. The African Group reiterates the continent's commitment and support for efforts aimed at strengthening the universalization and effective implementation of the convention in Africa and beyond. We also take this opportunity to thank UNODA, in particular, the BWC Implementation Support Unit, for the ongoing support and guidance to African states parties as we mark this golden anniversary of this convention. I thank you.
Thank you very much. So now, given the time, I am afraid we won't have any room left for final comments from our speakers, but there is a reception afterwards, and I'm sure many of our conversations will continue there, including on the importance of strengthening the institutional framework of the BWC, which is the question that we got from the floor. So with that, to provide closing remarks for this event, I am very pleased to introduce someone that does not need any introduction in this room. Daniel Fix, he is the Chief of the Implementation Support Unit of the BWC at UNODA. Daniel, thank you for your patience. The time is yours. The floor is yours. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thanks for the kind introduction as well. It's so good to see so many of you here and so many of you who have stuck through the whole 3 hours as well, and people that have joined online as well. So thanks again. Thanks for everyone here in the room. Thanks also obviously to the panelists now and the panelists from before as well. I'll just make some brief remarks, but as we said, I am really now standing between you and a drink as well, so I won't go on for too long. So first of all, my sincere thanks obviously to the European Union for its support to the convention, which has also allowed us to mark the historic anniversary today. The opportunity to come together not far from the council chamber in the Palais des Nations where the convention was actually negotiated has been a fitting tribute to this anniversary. As I said, I really want to thank both the moderators and the speakers, some of whom have travelled from across the world to be here to mark this occasion in person and also online, for sharing your valuable insights on the convention's past, present and future. The field of experts working on issues related to the convention forms a tight-knit community, and it's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience and online. And as I said, I would like to really thank all of the participants for attending the event today. We've had a fully packed room for the whole afternoon, and I think that's very encouraging and shows the great interest that there is in the convention. During the panels, we've heard a range of insights today spanning the potential future possibilities, as we were just hearing, the current discussions, and also stretching way back to the 19th century as well. We've heard from scholars, from scientists, diplomats. We've heard references to the technical, the political, legal, military, ethical, societal, and emotional aspects of the Biological Weapons Convention. Given the breadth of the issues that have been raised this afternoon, I'm not going to try to summarize the discussion, also because of the time that we have left, other than to make a general observation that this breadth, I think, goes to the very foundations of the convention. The norm or the taboo that we have heard about in the first panel is a vital but often neglected underpinning of everything else that happens within the Biological Weapons Convention. As we have heard, the convention was born at a time of global polarization, but states were still able to come together back in the 1970s to agree to codify that taboo into a treaty which is now adhered to by 188 states parties. We've been reminded recently that diplomacy can still endure even in the most troubling of times. The accessions to the convention by Micronesia and Tuvalu last year and by Comoros this year are important steps, as was acknowledged today, towards reaching universal adherence to the convention. We're looking forward to welcoming more new states parties during this anniversary year. And I think the fact that countries are still making efforts to join this convention after 50 years is really a testimony to its continued importance and relevance. As reflected in the number of people that have been present here today and in the ongoing statements of support for the convention that are being made by states parties almost as I speak, if you look on Twitter, you will see that there are more and more statements coming from permanent missions, from MFAs, including by the 3 depository governments to the convention as well. I think that really shows that this anniversary is, as we heard earlier, a time for positivity and recognition that biological weapons are still and will remain repugnant to the conscience of humanity. So in closing, I'm going to invite you all to, first of all, take a look, if you didn't already, at the exhibition just outside of this room, and then to continue the celebrations by joining us in the Serpent Bar for an after-event reception. Thank you once again. Thanks for your attendance. Thank you.